I'm Dr. Pete Economo, the East Coast psychologist.
And I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin, the West Coast psychologist.
And this is When East
Meets West. We are recording this episode still in the midst of election week. It's Friday.
When will it end?
It's Friday, November 6th, when we're really not releasing, but recording this episode. Important just to note, based on the topic that we're going to be discussing today, since we don't know the outcome yet of the American election. And what Pete and I wanted to talk about is individualism and politics. And individualism is something I actually talk about a lot with just like friends and colleagues, because it's such a central of value in America, in the United States. So
well, and it's making us all feel stressed still, so we're going to definitely talk about that.
That too.
Yeah.
So
well, I mean, I'm sure we're seeing it all over the place, right? Like, are you? I mean, not even clinically. Just think about your life socially. This is.
I mean, there's nothing it's not touching right now. I wouldn't say, right? I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm very tired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm tired for other reasons and that, but also like I've done a really good job of boundary myself around it. So I will pat myself on the back and say, I've allotted a certain amount of time just to read this stuff. I'm not on it all the time. I never have, I don't have the TV on in my house in general in that way. So I'm accessing information in a way that's healthy. So I'll give some example.
I'm laughing because
you're not.
Because I'm not. I'm doing a skillful job at taking care of myself in terms of meditating and practicing yoga. And this is a good example of why I don't use social media. Is I am, using all my news sources and just refreshing like you wouldn't believe. So I'm not being very skilled.
Don't do what Nikki's doing. But if you want to do it healthily, you could do it the way I'm doing it. No, I mean So what I do is like in the morning, I after meditation, I'll read a little bit. And usually I start with BBC, I do a local thing, and then I quick like Apple because they're annoying and they want me to pay for it. I just don't want to yet. I will eventually probably, but I don't want to yet.
Right.
And then maybe by the end of the day, but I don't do it like after 8:00 at night.
Very smart.
After 8:00 at night, I don't look at any, I used to put my phone away at 9. Now I'm doing 8 because of course I'm compelled once in a while to like, pull to the
urge.
phone.
Yeah, of course. You're a human. Yeah. Though you have great sleep hygiene, as we've discussed on the podcast before. Yeah.
Yes.
So let's kind of like weave our way back here to this idea of individualism in politics, because I do think it's like really relevant to what we're beginning to see. So at this point in time, obviously we're seeing a very, not at this point, it's a very close race, right?
Yeah.
It's a very close race. And there are a lot of discussions about, I guess the way to frame it is that why people continue to support Donald Trump, right? What are sort of the reasons?
Well, but let's also highlight that that's from a certain perspective.
Correct.
There are other people that are saying, why do people want someone like Biden in the office?
Sure. That is absolutely fair.
So perspective taking.
Perspective taking, and also just sort of observing differing lenses here, right?
Right. And I'm just going to be vulnerable for a moment, can I? Because
you can always be, of course.
Well, because again, I think we've said that this is not a political podcast, and it's not. So we're going to talk about the behavioral science, and we're going to get to individualization. But what we're saying about perspective taking is right now, as I sit here today with a rational mind, my rational mind, I don't understand how somebody is not like how a Trump supporter is not thinking this is irrational. Because behaviorally, I've never seen a politician act this way, which is a thing that's really motivating that base in a weird way, which is part of the individualization that we'll get to.
Individuals. Yeah. Well, and I think, to sort of add to that, Pete, I think something I'll also be vulnerable here that I'll share that, again, I'm sure some people are going to hear this, what you and I are saying and view it through a political lens. So I'm being very honest here. The behavioral observations that we make about Donald Trump, these behaviors in any other context outside of the political arena, from a psychological perspective,
right?
We would call these aggressive and verbally abusive behavior. And in fact, and this is the vulnerable part I'll share, is that, and I said this to lots of people years and years and years before Donald Trump was ever in politics. When I was teaching courses as a professor, both at adjunct professor at at Columbia and at Yeshiva, when discussing narcissistic personality disorder, he was the example that I would use. Now, I'm not diagnosing him. I don't have, in terms of, I obviously never met Donald Trump.
And by the way, I think we're going to have, how many other psychology professors would say that that's who they've used?
Right.
The majority of us.
I would just use that as like, what would be sort of like a pop culture example, like just kind of like.
And everybody knows. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's just to say that just basic foundational observational clinical information, like that's what we receive. That's
right. Yeah. Well, and so my vulnerability was like, I'm technically a registered Republican, which I can't believe I just said that out loud, because of course all my colleagues, I mean, in the world of academia, I am by far like a huge minority. And I'll say that's why I'm also a Mets fan, like, so I was raised this way. So I was raised in I think my entire system has shifted somewhat.
Yep.
But not really. Like, there are still people in my family that still, hold some of those ideals. So it's definitely, we're in a family system that we can't really talk politics often.
Of course.
And I am middle road.
You are, yes.
I am middle road. And why I stay registered as a Republican, I feel like I could have some input on, say, primaries, or be a voice of reason within sometimes otherwise irrational voices. Like because I feel some of those conservative politics, for me, go against human rights.
Yes. And I was going to say, and I'll share too. So it's, again, I don't think it'd be a surprise. I'm a registered Democrat and have been and come from a family of Democrats. And I'll say, like, when Pete and I first met and I learned that he was a Republican, I was very surprised.
Shocked. I had to pick her chin up off the ground.
Yes. Well, and I think the reasoning being that Pete and I share like most values. So what that shows is that while we, historically maybe differ on some policy beliefs, right? And again, others, maybe, we don't differ on all policy beliefs on some. I think what that demonstrates is that when we're approaching our belief system from a place of values as opposed to a place of
right and wrong.
Righteous, you ripped the words. Our ESP is alive and well. Righteousness. We can often find that there is more overlap and again, like you're saying, humanity.
And I really like that we're doing this now, because I know that we wanted to avoid this, but I do think that it highlights why this is purposeful and effective, because we're still friends.
We are, and very, very close friends at that. And I think, I honestly feel very, very sad that we're not able to converse with people of differing viewpoints. That, Pete and I've talked about this, for example, in other ways, like different and similar topic of like, we're talking about like white supremacy that exists in psychology. And there's, and like, there's all predominantly white psychologists. And I've said, there's lots of reasons why that's problematic, obviously. But one I'll say is like, I don't want to be in an echo chamber of a bunch of people that have my experience. Like that doesn't help me gain perspective or learn or come to synthesis in terms of new ideas and moving things forward. That's true in anything, right? And so we're not able to do that well.
Well, and I think this comes to, so I would say that like within my identities or how I was raised, one of the things that would set me apart is that I'm more collectivistic in how I approach, which is also part of my Buddhist sort of training and understanding. So I think that'll come back to what I think some of the, because I think no matter what side you're on right now, you're like, wait, 70 million people voted for Trump. Wait, 74 million people voted for Biden. You're questioning like how that's even possible.
Yeah.
We're breaking records, like the most votes ever, which is really exciting.
It is, yes.
I think for a democracy, which is also and
it's well, and so I appreciate you bringing in the collectivistic approach here, which I want to define these two these values to sort of weave in what we're discussing. I want these to be a framework for people to understand a little bit more about potentially some reasons, not all, Pete and I's opinions about why. And again, opinions. It's not. We haven't done a truth. Not truth. We haven't done any scientific studies.
And we have no fact checkers as part of our producers.
Right. It's just just us here. Just us. Why some people have made some of these choices. So Pete, if you could define what collectivism is as a value, and remember, and I guess before even I have you do that, let me just say, remember, for our listeners, values are not goals. Values are like directions. There's no endpoint to them. There's no
Right.
right or wrong values. Values differ based on um, our own personal experiences. We get to choose our values, and they're something that we feel connected to. They give us like a sense of meaning or
Mhm.
purpose or, fulfillment, vitality, connection, among others. So, explain what collectivism is as a value.
So collectivism is a focus on community, I think is a probably
Hmm.
easier way to really
Yes.
access that
Yes.
for us, where it's not just me,
Hmm.
and community is many different levels. We have things like Bronfenbrenner, where we think about all these levels of how individuals are experienced. So part
Hmm.
of collectivism is about your family is a
Hmm.
collectivist,
Hmm.
or could be part of your,
Hmm.
how you make decisions and your
Hmm.
behaviors and your culture. Also, your community in which you live,
Hmm.
maybe your religious identity in your society in which you live, et
Hmm.
cetera. Nationalism. So you kind of
Hmm.
keep going greater and greater.
Hmm.
And then, so, within the way I actually see it is more, even more universal, where it's literally just this universal, like human collectivism,
Sure.
which I think I've shared on here, that I had one friend recently who, as his age has become like far and far like more conservative, and
Mm.
we've had some interesting conversations. And he said, "Well, you're like one of those liberals, because you care about people." Like that was literally the words out of his
Mm.
mouth, and I was just like, "Well, if that's what it is, then yeah, because I
Yeah.
do care about people."
Yeah, yeah, which right, yes, which again, we were gonna hope that that's universal, though. Yeah, okay, so collectivism specifically,
So,
though, is sort of like an emphasis more, as you're saying, more on a community-oriented approach.
correct.
And I guess I would add, it would have been helpful for me to say this a moment ago. Uh, all things in the world, dialectically, there are, you know, advantages and disadvantages to all experiences. So,
Right.
we might say obviously some advantages of a collectivistic worldview or value is that there's an emphasis on the well-being of others, right, and
Sorry.
on contribution. Um, you know, there are disadvantages sometimes, right, that we can
Well, yeah, go ahead.
go.
Because
No,
even as you're saying this, like even how we're going to define individualistic versus collectivistic is also a dialectic, and very polarized in and of itself. So these two constructs.
exactly. No,
Yeah.
exactly. And so it's like
Yeah.
then and but I and a reason I want to and I'm saying this piece is that just I want everyone recognizing again, there's no right or wrong. There's no best or worse. It's like they're just different approaches, right? And they're each going
Right.
to have like pros and cons, so to speak. So, disadvantages to collectivism can be that it could sometimes the needs of the community overtake the needs of the individual, right?
Right.
And one's own desires or
And can lead to like compassion fatigue. So
correct.
so if
Yes.
I'm like a nurse who's just giving and giving during COVID,
Hmm.
I'm going to feel exhausted right now.
Absolutely. Or I'm thinking about different cultures where collectivism is a more of a dominant value that sometimes, like for example, I'm thinking of I don't know if in the dominant culture, the view is, I don't know, a belief that, for example, like homosexuality is believed to be wrong,
Right.
and somebody personally is, has a sexual orientation
Sure.
where they're gay, and then they're saying, well, I guess I can't be out
That's right.
because the community is saying that this is
So
wrong,
like
right?
one famous would be like an Orthodox Jewish, or like, a
Yes.
Hasidic community, which there have been several documentaries on, where
Yes.
it is not accepted. And so somebody who has that identity automatically
Yes.
feels like something is wrong with them. So,
Yes.
so give us the individualistic, because I think this is part of what we're experiencing right now.
Correct.
Why the
Yes.
distress we're feeling is because of this. So go.
Yeah. So individualism is the example I often use with patients when I'm trying to talk about how we each get to choose our values. I'll say, United States culture highly values individualism,
Yes.
which is linked to independence. It's slightly different. They're similar and different. Individualism prioritizes the needs of the individual person over the needs of the community. And of
Hmm.
course, this makes a lot of sense in historical context if we think about how the United States was formed, right? That we were separating from England. There was a
Yeah.
Revolutionary War that was fought, and then relatedly we can even go back further to colonization, right,
Hmm.
and sort
Hmm.
of obviously what happened. I mean, I guess I'm going to use the word, the genocide against
Sure.
Native Americans, and Manifest Destiny, which is about like just this is what I need, and I'm going to take what I believe to be
Hmm.
mine.
Hmm.
That is that's in its most extreme form, right? So I'm beginning to err on the disadvantages of individualism here when I share that, though
Yes.
advantages of course, would be that, if somebody wants to grows up in a family, I don't know, again, I use kind of a trite example. Maybe they grow up in a family of physicians and they want to be an artist, right? And they say, well, I'm going to pursue my dreams of being an artist because this is what was important to me, and I need to step out on my own, right? Like that's in a very small sort of like micro.
That's not so small. I mean,
right, sure.
For us
for
that have
those
worked with
going
that
through
clinically,
it. Yeah, totally.
It's a big deal. Yeah.
Right. So that, in American culture, if you are an American, or actually even if you're not, you may or may not value individualism, right? And again, it's not bad and it's not good. It's just a different worldview.
Right.
Anything that you would add to that description, Pete?
No, but I like that you owned that you really you leaned in with the negative.
I did. So. Well, and obviously I think that's because, and this is a conversation I've been having a lot with friends and colleagues, that I think we're in an era where the downsides, the disadvantages of individualism are being highlighted. And I'll share that I haven't always noticed that as much, honestly. I mean, I'm an American. I grew up in this culture.
And you're human.
And I'm human, right? So I focus on, and I highly value collectivism community, though of course focus on what do I need.
You and I were probably raised more individualistic, truthfully. I mean, I don't want to speak for you, but I definitely was.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean,
especially maybe in like also just as like middle upper class white folks, I think that's probably a big piece of our culture.
Yes, absolutely. And it was to say, and then just being Americans, you know what I mean?
Like, that's for sure.
That, I mean, there's just no way.
The entitlement.
I'm
gonna tell you some stories about my students, but no.
Yeah. Listen to our entitlement episodes to discuss that. So I think that understanding this as a central dominant lens, individualism in American culture, may help some people understand, people that don't, let me rephrase, people that don't understand why someone would vote for Donald Trump, right? Or people that say the only reason that someone voted for Donald Trump is because they're racist, right? We hear that a lot. It's not true.
Well, it's not true. And there's some truth to it, because I think as I look at these data now, the data are really showing that like the majority of Donald Trump's votes are from like white people.
From white people.
I think it's like 70%, whereas almost 80 to 90% of people of color and Latinos have voted for Biden. So I think that all. So race is a definite part of this.
Absolutely.
Because people are feeling threatened. People don't like differences. I think you also talked about that within the individualization, and so I think that right now, while I agree with what you're saying about the individualization versus collectivism, I do think that race is a big part of this as well. And
it goes back to Pete Peel's own. And so, but if we read it to the individualism, it's because, and this is, we can't, of course, neatly tease these things apart because humans are complicated. But it's because, so if this is maybe a more helpful way to phrase it. The reason why race can be intertwined with that is because privilege is can be intertwined with individualism, right? Which is to say somebody is going, I'm thinking about my own needs over those of others. Like I hear quotes of like, I've read things this week where people say like, oh, I don't like what Donald Trump says, or I don't like him as as a person, and yet my taxes are lower, so I'm going to choose that. And so, okay, like, so what does that tell us? That there is this super focus on the needs of the individual over the needs of the community.
Yeah, and like all of us want our bank accounts to be effective, but at what cost? And I think that's what a collectivist is going to look at, is like, what is the cost of that? Is the cost that then we're going to bully people, pout, because frankly, that's what it feels like right now. And so that's what I've been saying is like my middle path and what I feel is a pretty objective lens. I think when you're in the middle path, you can be a bit more objective. Says, how does anyone from a behavioral perspective not look at some of these behaviors and say it's irrational? Now, what I'm going to say is I feel like I could do that with a lot of behavior on Capitol Hill. So like
absolutely. And I've also said to many people, what we're witnessing isn't like a Republican or a Democrat issue. It's a human brain problem,
right?
And
the human brain problem, I think systemically, like again, this is getting a little political, but I feel like we need to have term limits. Like I don't think politician was ever really meant to be a career.
And and this is where, and look, and this is where we could obviously go on many tangents of political beliefs. But if we come back to just like, and maybe I'm going to use a different word instead of like rational versus irrational, is fact-based, right? Yeah. Just non-judgmental fact-based as opposed to emotion-based. And we're living in a society right now where emotion-based decision-making, I'm going to air quotes this, since if you guys aren't watching our YouTube channel, you can't see me do this, quote unquote, what we feel is right.
That's right.
And that's kind of like CBT 101. I always like tells to patients, if someone says, I feel like it's not going to turn out well for me, or I feel like this is the right thing, we go, aha, but feeling, that's not a feeling. That's a thought, right? That's not a thought. And thoughts may or may not be accurate. And in fact, what we know, and Pete and I talk about this a lot, our brains are not well equipped to assess reality accurately. And mindfulness and behavioral science gives us tools to cultivate a curiosity and be open to saying, is what my mind's saying based in reality, based in data? Mm-hmm. And sometimes what the reality is and what data is something that's uncomfortable to us. And there's a lot of times, and there's no way that we're going to be able to hear people or move things forward if we're not willing to be in the discomfort of acknowledging that there are different perspectives and different worldviews.
Well, I like that you just said that. And I like that we're linking this with individualization, because as we're talking, I'm also thinking, like, I know we typically say like politicians or high level people have narcissistic traits. And there's truth to that. Like when I work with professional athletes, that's one of the things we do in the first or second session is just validate that. It's like, yes, you have a golden spoon, However, if I think about politicians, really, maybe it's really more about the individualization, because they're thinking more about, and that's why my career politician thing is like, they're thinking more about their own career, their own identity, which is and the emotional connection is what's fueling their decisions, not their quote unquote, I'll air quote, go to the YouTube channel, the constituents, because they're all saying, well, I'm making this decision for my constituents. Are you though?
Right.
Are you?
And it's like, And so it's like, we would all, and this goes beyond politics. This goes beyond our country. It's that, as humans, and this is what, again, I think the Eastern traditions do a really skillful job at teaching, is that can we be more compassionate to one another? Can we practice perspective taking? Can we be curious about different experiences without judging one as right or wrong? And also, are we willing, and I know Pete and I come back to this over and over again, so here it is, to step into discomfort, right? Are we willing to step into discomfort in the service of moving something forward, in the service of growing and learning?
Well, I love that you give that advice as we're wrapping it up. I feel like we could have just went on and on this. So
I know we probably will. So probably, we were like,
let's do like a part 2, 3, 4, and 5 coming up. Tune in.
Yeah. So for those listening, I'm going to ask everybody to see if you can come back to grounding yourself in facts, cultivating curiosity, and willingly stepping into discomfort in the service of evolving, growing, and maybe understanding and connecting with other humans a little bit more effectively. This has been When East Meets West. I'm Dr. Nikki Rubin.
And I'm Dr. Pete Economo. Be present, be brave. This has been When East Meets West. All material is based on opinion and educational training of Drs. Pete Economo and Nikki Rubin.
Content is for informational and educational purposes